Welcome, everyone. It's great to host this amazing panel with some amazing experts. With us, we have today Jonas, and senior commerce advisor from Avencia. Also, we're joined by Benjamin from ATG. I don't think I need to tell anybody here what ATG does. And also with us, we have Anna-Karin from Nordic Leisure Group. To most of you, I think it's known as Ving. An amazing panel, and I think we're going to have a nice discussion here. So, to start things off and to also gauge the energy level of the room, let's start with an audience question. AI is changing how we understand our customers, and I'd like to know how much of a role does AI play today in your organization's growth today? The three options are low, medium, high. So for those of you where it's still low, please raise your hands. It's all right to admit this. I think it's a journey. Thank you. And medium. And those of you ahead of the curve. High. All right, not that many.
Typical Swedish, right?
Exactly. We are the country of lagom. So looks like there's a curiosity and a wish to drive AI forward. So I think this conversation will be right in time and right at the right level. Let's start things off with a question to all panelists, which is, can you share a concrete example of where AI-driven insights had a role in an initiative or a decision that was made? I can start with you, Jonas.
Sure. No, so I work as a consultant, so I work with many different clients, and I can bring one example also from my past experience of and I think many of you were talking about data and silos today, so let's take an example from that. And when you bring different data points, and this was an example, when you take search ranking data, you combine that with sales data. And especially when you work with dealer channels and in that sense, it's not so easy to get access of those data points. But when you bring those together and can see the correlations, AI can do a fantastic job of combining those data and understanding how strong are the correlations. So in my example, that actually was brought into installing a completely new strategic program about content optimization. And we could see uplift for 30% after this initiative was launched. So
amazing.
Pretty good example.
That's an amazing example. What about you, Benjamin?
Perhaps not the sexiest example in terms of cutting-edge Gen AI or agentic AI, but much like others, we struggle with maintaining reach in terms of media spend and reaching out to customers. Some here might have been exposed to betting campaigns, guessing a few. But anyway, the way we address that and this sort of ever-changing media landscape is to develop our own marketing mix models so that we can teach the models over time and so that they can devise the proper strategies so we can sort of reallocate our media budget. So that's been quite profound for us.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anna-Karin?
Yes, for us it's not a strategic maybe, but more operational efficiency. We're using the voice of the customer in custom Content Square, which adding up with a lot of text generated answers, and that's we're using ChatGPT to analyze that. Which one of the outcomes is really where we could do optimization with the checkout, which really performed better afterwards.
Amazing examples. It looks like there's AI is already driving action and not just insights. So there's some changes that are going on already. Now, another question for you, Jonas, this time. From your work with the different companies that you are in contact with at Avencia, where do you see the greatest untapped potential when it comes to AI-driven customer insights?
Yeah. I would say it's when you actually look at the behavioral data, because the transactional data we have been working with for many, many years and have a quite good understanding of. But when it comes to the behavioral data, and when you combine it over different channels as well, we have a lot of retail customers that have physical stores, they have their e-commerce online store, they have customer service, whatnot. And those data, again, are normally stored in silos. But when you kind of start to combine that into one holistic view, and you can understand the correlations, AI can support you to get a better understanding and draw actionable insights. And I think the important key here is to focus on the actions. So insights and data is nice, but if you don't do anything with it, then it's nothing worth, right?
Absolutely. That's actually creating that real omni-channel experience based on using AI to be able to create that. That's everybody's working towards. It's actually a really interesting use case, and that's a fascinating perspective. Thank you, Jonas. Now over to you, Benjamin. As a leader in analytics, how do you ensure that your teams is focusing actually on actionable insights rather than just more data? Because data, finding the insights is sure, it might be not the easiest thing, but it's easier than actually taking action. How do you make sure that the team is focused on action, not just more data?
So I think Louisa touched on this a little bit earlier during her talk at a glance. So for us, I think it's really important to be strategically aligned with the business stakeholders and to have some sort of system for an intake of projects. So we're not lacking data anymore. We're kind of far past that. And once you've proven yourself in terms of delivering value, you're not going to miss new projects. So I think for us, it's been quite important to find where we're heading as a company and how do we support this from an analytical standpoint. And I mean, in essence, it's going to be a point system that says this is how we think this project supports the business in terms of, does it improve the experience? Does it reduce risk? Does it increase revenue? And then some layer of complexity to that. And that gives us a foundation to have discussion with the commercial side of things to see, are we aligned here? And what's going to be our undertaking?
And that's usually the best approach that we do also in our work together and with our work with all of our customers, is trying to identify what are the business objectives, how do we translate those into initiatives, and how do we translate those initiatives into actions in Content Square and in a tool like Content Square, and connecting those outcomes with basically a red thread all the way to the overall objectives to ensure that this does happen. So thank you for your perspective, and it's very, very inspirational. Now over to you, Anna-Karin. Travel is a very dynamic industry with constantly changing customer behavior, especially after COVID. How has AI helped Nordic Leisure Group in responding to these changing customer behaviors and preferences over time?
As Lindex raised at their talk about, we're also very content heavy in our digital channels, so we've been using ChatGPT for content, hotel content, and also translation, since we're working on 4 different markets. We've also been using it for the customer center, also in the respond of the email bot we're using right now. When it comes to the customer insight and the team that I'm working with, we're using also custom GTPs. We were actually fed with all the customer segmentation data that we have, so all the analysis that we're doing could actually be depending on the customer segmentation groups.
It's very interesting. Sounds like you're already a long way in this journey.
We haven't really gone that far with the consolidating data. I was thinking about what you were talking about, Jonas. That is an ongoing project, just to bring all the sources that we have actually with behavioral data, sales data. So that is an ongoing project. But when we get that right on place, we're going to be more efficient, I think.
And it doesn't have to be a big bang project, right?
No,
you can do it step by step
course.
and taking, those meaningful sources and just 2 and 3 and add them over time. So then it becomes more agile and not so tough to master as well.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good segue into my next question, which is to all 3 of you. What are the barriers that you faced or are facing still in adopting AI and in implementing AI in the daily work life? We can start with you, Benjamin, this time.
I think it differs a lot depending on what kind of AI application we're talking about. So if it's, let's take Sense then, Content Square Sense, I think that's something that we need to familiarize ourselves with, and probably no barriers or boundaries when it comes to our super users, but rolling this out to sort of light users, we need to set up some guardrails and stuff to sort of handle it, and it definitely needs some oversight. So that's one example. Then AI that we build from the ground up, machine learning-esque models that's been around for quite a long time. Don't see any real barriers there. It's really built on the trust of the data scientists. Then I guess the last point there to mention, I think that there's some concerns in terms of, are we getting replaced? Probably not within the next 2 years, but there's a task to be done in terms of change management. And I think what we're doing at ATG, we're building it sort of as a grassroots movement to sort of leverage AI. And then we can also tie it quite closely to how we create value. And then when you have that transparency, it kind of facilitates change in quite a good way, I think.
It's a very interesting perspective. And when it comes to, AI complementing rather than replacing, that's another question that we're going to come to a bit later. But I'm also curious to hear your perspective, Anna-Karin, about this topic.
And I also agree with you. I mean, we've been using ChatGPT and Sense. It's also about the accuracy, and also, I mean, you have to test and verify. I think Lindex has also the example of Trosvägg. I talked to the designer the other day, and she had the same thing. It's like the nuances of words, which actually means that the analysis could go in either direction. So, I mean, for now, we really need the human interaction to see that the analysis is correct. And also the business impact, I think.
Of course. Anything you'd like to add, Jonas?
Yeah, I think coming back to that topic of trust, I think that's a big barrier. Like if you have AI-driven insights and you see, okay, this is what the machine thinks that the customer are behaving like, how can we trust that? And I mean, in the beginning, it's maybe challenging, trying different models, comparing and doing manual analysis and looking at it in different angles. And if you want to be really statistical about it, like also making some numbers on it and like how evident is that insight and such things. I would say another thing is about the cultural aspect of larger companies. If you go to the top management team and talk with them, it's very much opinion driven still, I would say. How can we bring that thinking into every layer of the company of working with insights, not having opinions, challenging those opinion driven people. I think that's an important aspect. That is a challenge as well.
That's such an interesting way of looking at it, because to be able to do that part of change management and changing people's minds, you go back to trust, and you need to present data that is trustworthy and that you have tested and that you know will be having the effect that you expect. And it's first when you have that trust that you are able to shift those minds that are usually driven by the gut feeling or by their experiences and so on. So it really ties back together to the idea of trusting the data and making sure that it's actually accurate and what you're looking at actually does represent reality. All right. Now over to you, Jonas. How have AI insights influenced a fundamental shift in your client's digital strategy or business model?
I think this comes in many forms. I think one of the first things were obviously generative AI and content creation and supporting. I think we heard a couple of good examples today as well about how can we use that as part of the content creation process, but still with a human touch at the end. So that's one part. I would say also when you take into product development companies or manufacturers, when you use AI to also analyze the feedback loop from customers of how they're using the product and how you can feed it also with an analytical view into the R&D department, that becomes a much more higher pace-driven manufacturer in my experience as well, which is interesting because then you can stay ahead. Or I mean, everybody will go there, but those early adopters will benefit for sure.
Of course. All right, question over to you, Benjamin. And this is a bit more of a, let's back it up a little bit and think of the future and try to be psychics here for a moment. How do you see AI reshaping the iGaming industry in the next 3 to 5 years? We know it's a complex industry, you know, also listening to what Louisa said earlier. In your opinion, and based on what you see here today?
Yeah, let me preface this by saying that I'm not uniquely qualified to talk about AI from a technical standpoint. But perhaps going back to what Louisa mentioned about the landscape in betting is quite interesting to have a look at. And it is very competitive, and the products that we offer are quite generic. So where the large volumes are revenue-wise, it's essentially the same offering in most verticals. So I would be highly surprised if like odds comparisons and those kind of laborious tasks are not agentic driven in a few years, which kind of changes a lot. For some customer segments, the journey is going to be fundamentally different. That I would think is one of the major ones. We're already leveraging Gen AI for assistance. We launched the world first, I think, horse betting assistant. And I think that's also a route that more vendors is going to go down, because it's kind of, you need to nudge customers who might bet on chance, who are willing to bet on knowledge, but needs to be facilitated in taking those steps. So that I think is going to become more prominent.
Exciting times ahead, indeed. All right, and then over to you, Anna-Karin. I'm curious if you can share a specific instance where AI insights led to a surprising or counterintuitive product decision at Nordic Leisure Group.
I think it's back to actually when we're using the ChatGPT that could support us in analyzing a lot of data, which means that, I mean, really when it comes to more operational efficiency, we could work smarter, we could work much more with a big amount of data, which that before took a lot of time for us, but right now we could be more efficient about it.
Very interesting. Now a question to all of you, a bit more of a general question. Doesn't have to be work related. What's the coolest or most surprising thing that you've used AI for?
I can start, and I would actually, because I mean, when you use it in work, it's all structured in a way that you don't get so much surprised. Yeah. But on a private note, I actually started to play around a little bit with music, and my father is a musician.
All right.
So I wrote a song for him using Suno. And he was so moved and touched by the quality of this song. So that was like, wow, can you really do that?
Amazing.
that was pretty cool. Not so much work related.
Yeah. What about you, Benjamin?
I'm very much a learner person, so I can really appreciate to have this always on-demand coach-like thing to delve into new topics. I think not a lot of things surprise you in terms of AI, because I think fiction has already sort of show the way there, and in reality in some way imitates that. But the satisfaction that you get from diving into new topics has been quite profound.
Amazing. Anna-Karin?
I think it's more like it's something you use on an everyday basis. If someone would have asked me that 3 years ago, I would say like, no, I Google. and that's something you don't do anymore. You use ChatGPT.
Exactly.
And also the dialogue-based search.
Mm. That's actually amazing. That's one of my favorite parts as well. Just speaking to ChatGPT or any Gemini or any of those and just giving me an answer straight up. It's amazing. For me, I once just played around with ChatGPT and told it, like, based on our conversations over the past like months, can you create a story about my life in like 2 pages? And it was surprisingly accurate.
Wow.
And I just asked it, can you make it funnier? And then it was also surprisingly funny. So it's amazing. You might see a book coming out soon if it says funny stories about Rami Taleb.
And that's pretty cool when you use Sora as as a speaking conversational. We even tried that as a moderator. So maybe next year, not sorry, but
I might be replaced at least as a moderator, but thankfully I have another job at Content Square, which is amazing. Now do we have any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask any of our amazing panelists? If not, some of them will still be here for we have Louisa.
So Benjamin, you mentioned the assistant for the horse betting. I think that's obviously very, very interesting. How would you design it in a way so it's not smart enough to know where to bet so you don't lose money?
You mean horse betting? Okay. So, and that's the key differentiator, right, between horse betting and sports betting in general, is that you don't bet against the company in horse betting. You bet against a pool, against other customers. But it's true that for set odds and that's very real. And I think that we're really ironing out that aspect as we speak. Good question.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? All right. We'll still be around. If you have any other questions, just walk up to us. If anybody leaves, I think Benjamin will be leaving early. You can come to me and or just share contacts with whoever you want and ask your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.